All right, hello and welcome back to the Sports Beat podcast by the Kansas City Star. I'm Sam McDowell, reporter here with the Star, and joined once again this week by Sporting Kansas City defender Ike Opara. Ike, thanks for joining us as always.
It's good to be back. Let's do it again.
We're going to get into one of the major reasons that we started this podcast, just to kind of show what you, Ike, and just athletes in general kind of experience, off the field, off the court, whatever sort of cliche you want to use, but just outside of the way we see you on TV in the stadiums and whatnot. And that topic today is going to be mental health and specifically just kind of sports psychology. So let's start off with just why is that topic important to you, Ike?
Yeah, I just think that everyone, all walks of life, whether you're an athlete or you're in politics, you're an actor, you're a doctor, whatever it is that you do, mental health is kind of always overlooked, and if it's not to the eye, it's always people don't understand what other people are going through, and so it's just one of those topics that I think has a stigma behind it, and while society, I think, is being more open-minded to it, it's also one of those things that I think people and everyone, myself included, just need to take the time to make sure that you're in a frame of mind before you move on to whatever it is, whether it be occupation or relationships or friendships, and I just think that getting the voice out there and experience and people being open about it. I know it's not everyone's share. Everyone deals with it differently. But I think when you're able to speak on it and make it normal, and try to normalize it, desensitize kind of the shock value that people experience or when they hear about it, it starts to become something that everyone okay, this is starting to be things that we can talk about openly, and hopefully everyone has a place or feels that they have a place to experience I guess freedom mentally.
Yeah, it's one of those things that even just 5 years ago, there wasn't much talk about what celebrities and athletes experienced as far as stuff like anxiety, even depression. Certainly in the NBA is when we've seen a lot of that stuff come out just in the last 2 years, really. I mean, you had Kevin Love write something for the Players Tribune.
Yep.
DeMar DeRozan's been big on that. But we've seen celebrities as well. And then, I mean, heck, this week in Kansas City, we had a politician, Jason Kaner, that dropped out of the mayoral race, and he attributed that to depression that he's fighting. So I obviously, you mentioned the stigma attached to it. We view sort of celebrities as being a little bit superhuman and maybe above something like that. But it's certainly, and like I mentioned at the top of this, it's one of the reasons that we started this podcast, to show that, mentally and the way you think about things isn't you're not immune to these sort of things, and just athletes in general have opinions on a lot of these topics that again is just, we see you guys as athletes, but there's just a lot more behind it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the big stigmas behind it is if you seek help or you having these feelings, you don't want to be perceived as weak, and that is something that is A, unfair, and B, if you're not yourself, how can you expect to be successful? How can you expect to be reliable and counted on? And so taking care of the self is the first big thing in life, and then you can be the brother or if you're whatever, wife, husband, daughter, son, be the best that you can be when you feel your best. And so I think that's one of those key just key thoughts is never feeling like you're alone, really. I mean, we experience it, and we want to be superhumans as athletes, but at the same time you know that something's not right, and if it's not right, how do I get myself better to be obviously what I want to be off the field, but then when I'm on the field as well, how can I be reliable to my teammates?
Yeah, I'm sure that even if you haven't experienced exactly what some of these guys that have come out have experienced, you can certainly understand that aspect of it, which is the fact that what the guys that we've seen come out, and it's still just a handful, it makes you wonder how many more are actually experiencing that. But the barriers that you mentioned are what are probably preventing them from speaking out on it.
Oh, absolutely. And I've got, and I guess maybe I'm some sort of safe with secrets, but I have a lot of friends in sports and not in sports that seek help, and they tell me about their experiences, and it's just one of those things. It really doesn't matter who you are, or what gender, what sex, what ethnicity. It affects everybody, and it affects people differently. And so I think that was one of the things that as I've gotten older, it really doesn't matter whatever it is that you perceive someone to do or be. You just never know what anyone's going through, and I think we always think it's the people who look down in the dumps or have the look of maybe sadness or depression, but really it could be people that you interact with every day, and you just have no idea. The ones that smile the most talkative, but deep down they really have I guess maybe demons or whatever it may be. And so I think that was as I have gotten older. I've taken stories that I've heard and just been observant of really it's anyone, and it's really everyone at some aspect or some point in their life.
Yeah, and I've always thought that was kind of just an interesting way to go about everyday life, in the sense that everybody's going through something, and you never really know the person that you're conversing with, what they're going through. But it's just I think that it's difficult, but it's maybe something that we all should be cognizant of, is to, when you're relating with somebody, to kind of be aware that there could be something going on there. And it's just, it strikes me as ironic you're wearing a shirt that actually says "Be a good person." And it's just like, it's just a good motto to have, because there could always be something deeper there that you're just not aware of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there are things that I've never shared with my parents. There are things I never share with my best friend. It's just there are things that you maybe don't feel comfortable sharing, and obviously as they get further away from the circle, it's the less you share. And I think it's just very interesting, because for me, only one person probably truly knows me, and that's my fiance. And I mean, she knows everything that I've told her everything that I've wanted to tell her, and there are times that I still will mention something she's never heard of, and she asks questions, and we go into and we deep dive into it. But yeah, it's always interesting, because I like to think that I have quite a few people in my life, and have been there for maybe even the duration of my life, a lot of my parents, and they still will never know things about me that I have, and so. I just think that when you meet people, at the same time, you don't expect them to disclose everything in their lives, but you just, like I said, truly don't know what is going on behind what's going on in their brain behind closed doors.
And we've seen just society in general is starting to catch up with what's going on mentally with people. And sports is kind of been a little bit behind that, but we've seen some progress in the last 2 years. And there's a statement here that the NBA sent out to all of its players that just said, each of our offices has newly enhanced mental wellness programs. We encourage you to use these to manage stress, anxiety, and other challenges. I know that you mentioned the MLS kind of has a similar conversation with you guys in the preseason, but what's interesting about this is it's not just the anxiety and depression and those various serious mental illnesses, but it's also just for athletes, and this is when we get into sports psychology. It's sort of just everyday thinking and how an athlete approaches the game that really still isn't publicized all that often, in the sense that there's this game is. I don't know what the actual percentage breakdown is, but a large chunk of it is mental as well, and how you approach the game. So, and I know that's something that you have experienced. So let's kind of start there with what you've personally experienced.
Yeah. So I don't know if everyone knows my background and whatnot with my career, so to speak. But I think the first 6 seasons I dealt with 4 season-ending surgeries, and so for me it was, man. Am I doing something wrong? Am I in the wrong mental state of mind? Is there something that I can be doing better? Because this tends to be happening. Is it just bad luck? And so I was kind of at, at a loss a bit, and I was looking for, anything that could, possibly help me. That was when I was deciding whether I was going to continue playing or retire or, figure out what my next steps are in life. And so I was just kind of all over the place. And so, I think when I kind of, started to commit to really trying to make that comeback again, I was like, okay, I want to seek help for, what I can potentially be doing better. And so I went to see a sports psychologist. And why I felt pretty comfortable going is because I had a couple of friends who had, been to sports psychologists in their time. And sports psychologists actually work with teams in certain leagues. And so some teams believe in it, some teams don't. Some people believe in it, some people don't. I kind of went in with like, okay, well, I don't know what to expect. Yeah. I'm just going to go into it. And, when I went, I kind of had this thought, like it's kind of like college. You get into it, you get out what you put in.
Sure.
If you go to class, you take classes you want to take and you really invest in yourself, it can be very helpful. But, if you skip classes and you want to do whatever you want to do, your college experience is a little different. And so I went into it, I think very, very reflective. And really it's what you're willing to share is you'll get the best results.
Sure.
The more closed off you are, the less results that you'll see. And that for me was, kind of a big, barrier, because you're going into a room with someone that you've never met, and it's a complete stranger. And I kind of mentioned earlier, the further away from the circle you are, the less likely you are to disclose. And so you're in the room with someone that you haven't met, and you're supposed to, disclose all the information that you can.
Right.
It's a little hesitant at time. But I think, I just, relayed the message about, this is what's happened to me in my first 6 years. We talked about, some more things in soccer, talked about some things out of soccer, but mostly it was in soccer. And just, is there a mindset that I should be approaching, day to day? And really was able to, provide me some helpful tips along the way of my comeback, I guess.
And just to kind of put a timeline on this is after your Achilles injury in
2015, yeah.
And so you're coming back in 2016.
So so that would have been, I had surgery April 2015. I probably would.
And you considered potentially not coming back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm not sure. I'm not clear about when I decided to come back and when I started to see him. But it was some point in 2015. I think it was the summertime when I was really able to start walking or jogging, and I was coming back. And I also wanted tips for as I'm making this comeback, what possible things should I be thinking about? What preparation should I be taking as I'm making the next steps in my recovery? And then when I recover, what's the next steps I should be taking to try to give myself the best chance that a setback or something else doesn't happen. And really, I took a couple big things out of that, and really you kind of you go in with thoughts and ideas, and he helped articulate my thoughts, and so it was actually reassurance or reassuring that some of the ideas that I had were just needed a little bit of tinkering.
Yeah, but you felt like you're on the right track.
Yeah, and I have a pretty strong identity to begin with, but I just think that I was able to hone in on a couple of key points that needed some altering.
Hey, it's Blair Kirchhoff, and if you're listening to this, you love Kansas City sports, whether it's the Chiefs, Royals, Sporting, Mizzou, KU, or K-State. And no one covers these teams like the Kansas City Star. If you currently subscribe to the paper or have a digital subscription, thank you for your support. And if you don't, here's a great offer. It's called Sports Pass, unlimited digital access to every sports story and video on kansascity.com. And it's just $30 for the first year. It's the best sports value in town, just 8 cents a day or $2.50 a month. You can't beat that. Subscribe now at kansascity.com/ Sports Pass.
I think that when you've experienced, because I think you've been tested mentally about as anybody, specifically in the locker room you're in, because of what you've experienced, having to constantly come back and go through that work, only to maybe be on the field for a couple of months like you were before the Achilles injury. But one of the sort of obvious things that I think would go through, heck, even a fan's mind when they see you grab your ankle or something during the middle of a play is, how do you block out? And did you guys talk about this just mentally, the fact that you can't constantly go on the field thinking you might get injured?
Yeah, definitely. That was obviously one of the bigger points. And, I think whether you think it or not, it's in every athlete's mind. But if it's consuming you, that's a problem. And so I think it's just best, it was just, ways to best, think about, the positive more so than the potential negative. And for me, what I've taken, for the most part, before that, but mainly, solidified through that was, I'm not scared to fail, because, the preparation that I've done, I think that I have a pretty good, view on myself and a pretty good view of my surroundings. And so I think for me, failure isn't something that I'm scared of, because I know that I've put in the time, the effort, and I've done all the best that I could. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it's not because of a lack of effort. It's just.
But does it take you a while to get to that mindset?
I think, I think I've always approached it that way, but I didn't really realize it until, possibly maybe, when I was in those meetings. And, and I think that was another thing that made me feel at peace was, at the end of the day, I won't look back and have regrets, because I know that I've done every single thing that I can to, try to put myself in the best possible position to be successful. And so, I won't look back. The only regrets maybe will be, oh man, I wish I would have had all those 9. Well, currently I'm in year 9, but would have had all those nine years. But in terms of what I've been able to do when I've been active, no regrets for me. And I think that's one of those key life, just in general, whether it's sports or not, that I will take with me regardless.
Certainly, one of the things that always interests me about the psychology of sports is how you separate sports from everyday life. And obviously, a lot of the things we talk about are the way they blend together, which shows, I think, just how difficult it is to compartmentalize the games in your life as a professional athlete versus life away from the field. So what's the process of focusing out here, but trying to get away from it if at all possible?
And I like to think that I do a pretty good job of keeping it separate, but it's kind of like a Venn diagram. There's definitely some overlap. And I'll tell you, I've been playing sports since I was young, sure, and I've been in different clubs and doing different things, and I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg, but I've always had the discipline and the motivation, and so I think whether that be outside of life or in soccer, there's definitely some crossover, and it's definitely helped me, I would say perfect some characteristics of my personality. And I think that when I was in the classroom, I was a very disciplined student and very, very hardworking, and it's kind of the same when I was on the field. And so again, I don't know which one came first or if that's just always been me, but there's definitely always some crossover between the two.
Where do you feel like that this topic is going in sports? When we talk about mental health in sports, when we talk about sports psychology, as an athlete yourself, where do you kind of see the future of this in sports?
Yeah, I think obviously it should be trending upwards, and the more people are talking about it, the more exposure that it gets.
Sure.
And I think that's key, because I saw what Kyrie Irving actually said in the news when he thinks the world is flat or whatever, and he didn't realize the impact of what his words would do to kids, and he's had scientists just come up to him and say, no, I have to change my whole curriculum to tell them that the world, whatever. And Kyrie apologized and said, I didn't really realize that my voice had such an impact. And it's like, well, I think younger kids especially are impressionable, and not for not in the bad sense. They're your kid, and you don't know what's right or wrong, and you're learning. And so I think there are kids who are out there who probably have anxiety and these emotions and maybe not know how to express them. And so people, such as, Kevin Love and all the people who, whether they want to be an idol or not, your voice means something. And if you're able to make it, have a positive voice, you might be changing, one kid up to, thousands of kids and making it, making them feel like, they are, okay, that it's okay. And I think that's a very positive thing moving forward.
How much do you guys talk about, whether it's coaches or just as players yourselves, about just the mental way you approach, your jobs?
Yeah, I mean, well, definitely. I think if it's kind of under a pretty big umbrella, and it can go from sports psychology to obviously some of the harder, unfortunate feelings such as depression and sadness. But then there's the mentality of domination, I guess, in to say, like, as a defender, my mental, and when I step on the field, my mindset is, okay, I'm going to win my duels, my battles against this forward. Mm-hmm. And that is a key, that's a big factor in when you step on the field as a defender, to go into it thinking you're going to win every single battle. And it's not acceptable to lose one, kind of thing. And then obviously goalies are probably a little different, and forwards are, I'm going to finish all of my chances. And visualization, I think, is big for anyone in sports. Visualizing yourself scoring the goal, visualizing yourself stopping a goal, visualizing yourself being successful, winning a trophy. And I think that's a pretty big, aspect of sports, is visualization and striving to be who you want to be and visualizing it.
It seems like one of the most difficult aspects just mentally about your job is that defenders are, it's kind of like a referee quality. You only really show up when something doesn't go well a lot of times. And I know you scored a couple goals over the past 3 matches, but somebody scores a goal against you guys, and it's got to be the back line's fault, or it's got to be the goalie's fault. Yeah. So that certainly would have to be kind of a mental hurdle. You have to just get used to. You just kind of have to accept that it's part of the job.
Yeah, I mean that's always the interesting one. It's always your fault, when it's a goal scored, and there's not much glory, specifically, for defenders typically, and whether or not the play broke down well before it got to you, that's who people focus in on, right. Defenders or goalie. And so it's one of those things that it can be tough earlier in your career, but as you get older, you really learn kind of the opinions, or you trust. You can only trust so many people, and obviously the people who are in it with you usually understand a lot more than people who aren't in it with you.
You can kind of take some solace in that that the people that matter
correct
know.
Right, and not that, and it's never to devalue maybe a fan's perspective or thought, because everyone it's fine if you want to have an opinion about one thing or the other, but at the same time it's okay. I know, and I feel assured that I know why this goal happened. Mm-hmm. I know what I could have done better, possibly. I know what 10 other people on the field could have done better. All right, time to move on. And
sure.
that's the tricky part is, when, you make a mistake, and maybe it's not even your mistake that you've made. How do you rebound from it? And that's always the key in sports. I mean, no matter what sport you're in, it's like adversity's coming. How are you going to rebound? Yeah. And it's always, all right, forget about the last play. It's all about the next play. And I tell you what, the higher levels you get, the harder it is. The better you are, the harder it is. I mean, you really look at LeBron James, and this guy is literally probably the best player on earth. Yeah. And people still find ways to criticize him. So you're not going to be able to win.
Right.
It's just a matter of how confident do you feel about your abilities, and how do your teammates feel? How do you feel? And really going from there, as long as you have the trust of the coaching staff, your teammates, and obviously fans are very important in this, because there are a lot of positive ones out there. And then you can carry on and learn from your mistakes and try to get better.
And that's probably a good spot to kind of put a bow on this conversation. But the things you just mentioned, you just have to have, and I don't know if mental toughness is the right word, and I think maybe it's a little bit of the wrong phrase that we so commonly use because of the fact that you mentioned earlier that it's seen as a sign of weakness when you have a mental illness, but it's just shows the whatever phrase you do want to use, that's what it sort of requires, and just to be a professional athlete, because regardless of what position you play, and we mentioned that your position's highlighted even more, but you're going to have people that are just always critiquing and criticizing.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I guess it comes with the territory. It's just a matter of now, how do you take it personally, and if you do, use it as a motivation to maybe put it down that same person's opinion's throat the next time and say, oh, this is what you thought. All right, this is what I'm gonna do the next time. But I think everyone deals with it differently. I deal with it in a way of I go home and I'm, like I said earlier, I'm pretty reflective, and I'm able to figure out what needs to be done better. And listen, I know I'm the first guy that knows when I make a mistake. Like I already know that, and so it's a matter of I more so let myself down. And I think when athletes say that they're the harshest critics, it should be that way, because if you're not, you're probably gonna struggle a bit with opinions or criticism from people that you shouldn't have to worry as much about. So when I'm my hardest critic, then I'm okay with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Ike, for joining us once again. Hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. There's going to be plenty more to come in kind of a similar vein. So thanks a lot for listening this week.